Hi all, Adi here from Hounts and Jaunts. As always, thank you so much for clicking on the video. I'm in deepest, darkest Sussex and I'm at Holy Trinity Church here in Poinings. I'm right by Devil's Dyke in the South Downs. Now, if it's your first time joining me, welcome. But if you're one of my regular viewers, thank you so much. I really appreciate all of you. And those of you who have recently supported my new shop and the memberships, I really do appreciate it. Honestly, you've got no idea how much you guys have changed my life. So anyway, let's go and have an explore of this wonderful church. The pretty little village of Poinings is tucked just underneath the South Downs, which isn't far from the city of Brighton, and you can see the rather spectacular Devil's Dyke sitting just up above us. And from the outside it really is a beautiful old Sussex church, and it's amazing how much history is wrapped up in this relatively small building. Because although the church here today is largely 14th century, people have been worshipping here on this site for considerably longer. One of the first things you notice when you enter the church is the font, and this dates from the late 14th century. It's an 8-sided font, and then on top we've got an early 17th century font cover. There was almost certainly a Saxon place of worship here, and a church at Poinings is actually recorded in the Domesday Survey of 1087. So we're talking about over 900 years of recorded Christian worship on this spot. Now, the original Norman church that would have replaced the Saxon church after the conquest apparently survived on the site for about 300 years, and amazingly parts of that earlier building may still be here, and I'll show you some Norman tiles later on when we go up to the altar. So there's so many layers of history, one built on top of the other, and I absolutely love that about old churches. They aren't museums that were put together at one particular moment. The buildings that have evolved, they've been altered, repaired, damaged, restored and used by generations of ordinary people, and that's exactly what we're looking at here today. This present building here principally dates from around 1370. On the south wall of the nave here, there's traces of a medieval wall painting. Now later biblical texts were painted on top of this, including the 10 Commandments, but underneath those 10 Commandments you can still make out remnants of the medieval painting, including part of a representation of St. Christopher. And again, it's something that can be very easily missed if you're just walking around looking at the architecture. The church was built by the brothers Thomas and Richard de Poynings, following the wishes of their father, Sir Michael de Poynings. Now, Michael died in 1369 and had made provision for a new church to be built here. So the church we see today is really the result of that medieval rebuilding project. And I noticed loads of these little mice hidden in little corners on windowsills around the church. Weren't they absolutely charming? Lovely idea. The church is cruciform in shape, so you've got the nave, the chancel and the north and south transepts, and then the wonderful central tower which sits over the crossing, and it's a very distinctive medieval arrangement, and that central tower is one of the things that gives Poinings its character. And look at that ladder. Would you fancy walking up there? I know I wouldn't be confident to climb those steps, and I'm not sure what this is. If anybody knows why it's attached to the wall like that, do let me know in the comments. I'm sure somebody watching this knows what it is. And there was also an ancient bier which I love to see, and I love that it still had the pegs, so they would have been popped into the hole as the bier was being pulled with the coffin on it to bring somebody to their final resting place, so they would have stopped the coffin from sliding off. the beer. This section of the church was formerly known as the Montague Chapel, but today it contains the vestry and the organ. I'm going to head over now into the south transept, and this contains this late 14th century screen. It's divided into openings, and it's thought possibly that it could have been part of an earlier rood screen. I found a really surprising connection here, and that's with George Washington. Now, he wasn't actually from Poynings, so I don't want to give you the wrong impression. The connection is, though, it's through the powerful Poynings family who were associated with this church, because George Washington was a distant descendant of Sir Michael de Poynings, who was the medieval lord whose family helped rebuild this church in the 14th century. So although George Washington was never here himself, his family tree reaches all the way back to the people who worshipped and buried here, and I think it's an amazing connection for such a tiny little Sussex village church to have. Now, the south transept has a particularly strong connection with the Poynings family. There are medieval memorial slabs and indents here, including ones associated with members of the Poyning families. Unfortunately, some of the original brasses have disappeared, but the indents for them still remain. And these are fascinating because an indent is basically the impression that's been left on a stone slab where a monumental brass would once have sat. So even though the brass itself has gone, you can sometimes still see the outline of the person who it commemorated. And what great timing that was to see this beautiful butterfly. Now, there's several tombs here with examples of those indents, and one has been associated with Michael de Poynings and another with Richard de Poynings, who died in Spain in 1387. And this piece of wood on the wall here is actually an old tie beam that when the church roof was restored during the Victorian period, it was moved here. It's from the 17th century, and I believe the name on there was a former rector of the church. So even though the original memorials have been lost, the stone can still tell us something about the people who were once remembered here. There's so many layers of history here. We've got the medieval period followed by the Reformation, and then the 17th century, and then the Victorian Restoration. And there's actually still some 17th century material. That is actually one of the really special things about this church, because there are early 17th century fittings here that have actually survived really well. The pews are 17th century, and this pulpit, which is absolutely stunning, is also 17th century. Look at the carving. Proper workmanship. Proper craftsmanship, shall I say. Let's pop up and have a look at the sounding board at the back. The Poynings family were a very important local family, and the village itself, of course, has taken its name from them. And they were a family of knights, soldiers and landowners, and they even had their manor house here at Poynings Place. Unfortunately, the house eventually disappeared after it was destroyed by fire in 1737, but the Poynings name is still very much part of the story of this village. And the church that they helped create is one of the finest surviving medieval village churches in Sussex. Now, it is actually a Grade 1 listed building, which gives you some idea of just how important the building is from a national heritage point of view. And I found another cute little church mouse hiding up there on the window ledge. The church was restored again in the 19th century when it was in much need of some TLC. But luckily, unlike many churches of that period, quite a lot of the medieval features remain intact, including this 3-seat sedilla where priests would have sat during the services, and also the piscina. There's also a lovely war memorial up here on the wall commemorating the men who lost their lives during the war. The altar rails here are also particularly interesting. They're associated with an order from Archbishop Laud's period when he required holy tables to be properly enclosed or fenced off. Sadly, there's only a couple of the original angels there, but they're still very beautiful. You can see where the other angels would have been. On the walls there's memorials to some of the local lords and ladies, reminding us just how closely this church was connected with the important families of Poinings and the surrounding area. And I always find these memorials fascinating because behind every name is somebody who lived, loved, worked and eventually became part of the history of this little village. Just in front of the altar, we've got something that's even older. Down here in the floor are these rather wonderful medieval tiles, and some of these are believed to have come from the earlier Norman church that stood on the site before the present building was constructed in the 14th century. We tend to look at the walls, windows and the architecture when we visit an old church, but sometimes it's actually what's underneath our feet that can be amongst the oldest things here. And the present church dates mainly from around 1370 when the Poynings family rebuilt the earlier church, but those tiles give us a little physical connection with the building that came before it, and so do these wonderful benches in the porch. I couldn't find out how old they were, but you can tell just by looking at them that they've been here for a few centuries. And that's one of the things that I really love about old churches like this. We don't just have one period of history, we've got layer upon layer. The earlier Norman church, the medieval rebuilding, the later alterations and restorations, and then the centuries of ordinary working people who would have come through these doors week after week. The porch was actually built over the grave of Michael of Poynings' grandson Richard, who died in 1430. I'm just going to have a quick look at the west door, which we looked at. I opened that on the inside at the beginning of the video, and it dates from 1608, and it would have one time been blocked to allow entry to a gallery, and that must have made the pews below really, really dark. And there's also another blocked door over here. And as always with these old churchyards, nearly all of the headstones, you can't read them. They're just completely faded to time and to weathering. But I'm going to head out of the churchyard, and then there is a cemetery that I noticed on the way into the church. So we're going to have a walk down and have a look at that one. The church is just here behind me, but on the way in here when I was driving up, I noticed that there's a separate cemetery. They probably ran out of space because that is on a mound as well. So let's go and check it out, have a quick look, see if we can see anything interesting. I love it when cemeteries have the wrought iron gate. You can tell I'm a Hammer horror fan, can't you? Very peaceful in here. Stunning views of the Downs. Oh, look at the size of this cross here. Wow. It's quite substantial, isn't it? So Charles William Kaiser and his wife. It's a very rich family. Makes these little ones pale into insignificance. Oh, you can actually see the church. There are the trees there. It's so dry, honestly, it's like a tinderbox here. You can see some of the hills behind me, so I'll just show those to you before we go, so you can see how dry it is. Hopefully by the time this goes out, we will have had a little bit of rain. Pilot Officer Rothwell, age just 20. Shocking, isn't it? Rest in peace, sir. Thank you for your service. I'm going to wrap the video up here. I do hope you enjoyed our visit to deepest, darkest Sussex, and if you did, if you could please like, subscribe, hit the like button, notification bell, all those things. I mean, even watching the videos, it just helps me so much, but that just helps the YouTube algorithm, pushes it out a bit more. And if you want to help a little bit more, because I always make donations, then there's the Buy Me a Coffee link, or there's down below, there's memberships to the channel if you want your name mentioned. It just helps support me a little bit more, and guys, I really do appreciate it. God, I just made myself jump there. Thought I saw somebody, it wasn't, it was just a headstone. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you for the next one. Bye for now.